ahead and get started. I might have to give mode 3 a try. I don't know if I could switch modes at this point in life, but
Yeah,
and
I
it's
think
funny too
switching
because I'm
modes
an avid
seems.
video gamer, right? So
Well,
Yeah, I think it also depends.
even if I switch to a
I was
video
just,
game where like the one thing is inverted, it's just impossible to fly or to play the game. It's
yeah.
so
yeah, like my
annoying.
best friend, he would always play with inverted sticks on video games for like first person shooters. So down is up and up is down, and it just floating head. So if you do this kind of thing, and
Like
I'd
that for
always have to
some
switch.
games, and I don't know what makes me like it like that. So I think
Ah,
it's whether I feel like my perspective is the character or the camera.
right.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we'd always have to, like, every time we'd pass the controller, go into options, change it. It's just kind of annoying. I'm like, stop playing like this.
My feeling was the same thing you get when you're inverted and you can't make it go where you want to go was the
Mhm.
same feeling I was getting when I started to learn to fly FPV, and that's what gut made me try all four. Because it's the
Right.
same feeling. It's like having the wrong control scheme when you play an FPS game or when you play
Yeah.
whatever. Like I just can't make my thumbs do what I want them to do. And then I just found one that they did what I want them to do, and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm doing this.
It works.
So
Yeah. If it works, do it. Right.
yeah.
All right. So I think we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, let me share my screen. Hold on. We won't get started just yet. Let's see it. Let me pick the right one here. I believe this is it. Let's see. I'm gonna try and do this. See if that helps with some of the issues. Readability versus smooth. We'll give it a shot.
It doesn't look
It
super
says you're in
readable.
720/30 now, so
Okay, so let me switch. Hold on. Let's see. Let me try this again.
and yeah, that is the trade-off with Discord. You can either get smooth animation or screen show of 1080p.
Yep, now I can see the text a lot better.
All right, we'll go with that. I'll switch it next time. I don't think I have any videos today, so
Yeah, now it's on source, so it's just gonna be whatever you give it.
yeah. So, all right. So first up, obviously, is the AAAC meeting tomorrow. Dave was alluding to some of this before we got started. Um, but that meeting is to take place tomorrow. If you'd like to download the ebook and kind of go through the 100 and some odd pages of that, you can view that here. Yes, again, to XJet's point earlier before we started, there were 12 new members that have been added to the AAAC. And again, it seems like the the um, recreational hobby of drones has been left out of being represented on the AAAC.
Not part of the
I think
conversation.
Yeah.
I think there were like
Well, actually,
138 people trying for that spot, right?
yeah,
Something like that. There's
Yeah.
12 spots.
yeah. And in point of fact, we are part of the conversation.
Well,
as much as
we are, but
we've
In a different
contributed.
way.
We've contributed to the last 10 ACT tasking groups and very actively, and we have were invited onto the BV Loss ARC. So while it is frustrating to be passed over again, third time, it's we are at least very much part of the group that's putting this together. And as you'll see in the tasking group 13, our name is there once again.
yeah, but it's one thing to we actually make a difference and work on the groups and do things, but it's a totally different thing to be recognized as one of the official members on the on the list. Like it
Yep.
doesn't stop us from being productive. It's just the way things look.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those. Yeah, it's one of those. Yep, completely agree, Dan.
Yeah, why don't we take a quick look at the like agenda and just brush over that quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. All right. So here's the agenda. So you've got the FAA greetings and logistics. We've got the read official statement from the designated federal officer.
All
which
things
would
we can
be-
just ignore when they happen.
yeah. Um, it's the handshakes and whodunits kind of around the room. Review of the agenda, obviously. Opening remarks from several different people. We've got a remote identification update, which I will assume they will be discussing the postponement of enforcement on standard. We've got tasking group 13, which is advanced air mobility near-term operations, and of which Dave is going to be presenting some of the findings from that. There's digital flight rules briefing, and then a lunch break.
Maybe you
And
can,
then
Dave, describe what is digital flight rules and why is that in here? That comes from like the BV loss arc and things, right? Do I remember hearing about it there?
let's see. Sorry, I'm
You've got me
scrolling
now.
fast. Please don't have
Digital
a seizure
flight
here.
rules. It's on TG13.
No,
It's
no,
just
no.
after. I'm moving to it.
It's another topic on the agenda. But wasn't digital flight rules something that was talked about a lot in the BV lost arc?
Yes. And I'm
Let's see. So here we go. We've got the need for digital flight rules. So, advanced air mobility is an umbrella term encompassing many use cases and technology capabilities. Adding each use case to the national airspace through separate rulemaking will take decades. Without long-term vision, near-term interest will result in conflicts. VFR. So the need for DFR lies in the gap between visual flight rules and instrument flight rules. VFR provides operational freedom but limits low visibility operations. IFR allows low visibility operations but limits operational freedoms. And both significant rely on human decision making to cover anything not explicit in rules.
So to me, this
So
is kind of like thinking about things from the old-fashioned aviation side of things. Like, oh, we need aviation rules for how people fly drones. So people fly drones via their digital flight rules because that follows kind of what visual flight rules and instrument flight rules are.
right.
Even though to most of us it doesn't matter at all.
So it
Yeah,
looks
you
like they're
wouldn't.
trying to. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, you wouldn't be able to get VFR because you can't see out of a drone, right? So they're saying like, hey, DFR counts as VFR, but with the picture from the drone. It seems like.
Yeah, it seems like so a couple different things that they're incorporating. So you've got your GPS for navigation, databases for flight management, which would be things like a loft, could be ArcGIS, that kind of stuff. Digital autopilots, intent sharing. Let's see. V2V. I don't know what V2V means. Detect and avoid. Cooperative operating practices, so community-based rules for predictable behavior, and third-party service providers for USSs. We've talked about USSs, unmanned service suppliers. Those are gonna probably see increase, and I've got an article on that's happening in Ohio actually coming up, and we can talk about that a little bit. But USSs are for digitally managing UAS traffic, similar to air traffic control, but for UAS. So yeah, a couple different things there. It'd be interesting to see what they want to do with this in terms of digital flight rules and how that rolls out. And I mean, I imagine again a lot of this will be inherent more so in commercial versus recreational. But I mean, things could roll either way, really, right? So
and of course our TCA is another international standards body organization, and so this last page looks like an advertisement for we can help you build a standard for digital flight rules. And this was an area that we did, Dan, thank you for jogging my memory. This in section 2.5 in the BV loss arc, we spent a lot of time on, we called it advanced flight rules, and tried to get into this area of merging as well as it's where we were able to bring up FPV as augmenting the ability to fly and helping situational awareness.
let's see. So, in terms of the graph, so it says, so the blue line would be rulemaking standards. So rulemaking is the blue, gray is the standards, yellow is momentum, and then digital flight. So it's basically using rulemaking and how things can happen at the same time to work their way towards digital flight is how I'm kind of understanding it. But yeah, so that'll take place tomorrow. So and we'll be kind of coming together afterwards to kind of talk about some of the salient points that come out of the AAC meeting. And
what else was on that agenda, real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's 3 other points. One is that we've been part of the TG13, which is a framework that the FAA issued to the AAAC and asked for feedback. It was a bit of an odd document, but it's important in that it's an AAM framework of what rules and what regulations should the FAA consider, and that's what the essence of the framework was. So it's worth a scan and worth looking at. In addition, the other 2 agenda points that are really of interest to us are the 2 new tasking groups, TG 14 and 15. And there is a slide on each.
Let me see here. Let me scroll down here. Again, pardon my quick scrolling.
It's all right. It's at least clear text when it's scrolling.
Team, ARS, ASRS. Let's see. New taskings. So let's see. We've got tasking 14, which is the BV loss ARC opportunities. So the tasking is for the AAAC to examine the BV loss ARC recommendations and identify opportunities where industry can assist and accelerate implementation of BV loss regulatory actions.
Well, of course, that's interesting in as much as there was a whole segment on here are a series of recommendations that the FAA can act on expeditiously and get out and promulgate regulations within 1 year. Of course, that was when we closed up the ARC, which is that March of 22.
Yeah.
So here we are coming into end of October.
And so they want, well, I mean, technically it's within a year because they want recommendations posted tentatively scheduled for the March 2023.
If only we
these
could
are-
just
but
tell
that's-
them, like, hey, look at the hobby. Look how they're
RT
safely doing
RT
BV loss ARC or BV loss flights every day. Maybe you could
Right.
just take some advice there.
Right. So, but that is an important one, and we have volunteered to work on that. Hopefully, we get accepted into working on that tasking group.
All right,
And
and the next one
15.
is the drone community engagement lessons learned and best practices. So the AAAC to make recommendations on lesson learned and best practices related to drone community engagement methods. Now, this is something we have talked extensively to the FAA regarding their engagement with different levels of the drone community.
Yeah, what are the
Um,
recommendations? How about you follow some of the ones we've already given you?
and I mean, from a couple different aspects. And I will say that the FAA has started to do some community outreach and kind of focusing in on different segments of the industry. I do know that they've done a couple regional events, and I think they're like 2 or 3 day events, separated by different kind of segments: educational, commercial, and recreational. And there's been some participation from local recreational groups in those, and as well as stuff like about a year ago or so, we did the Droning On After Dark, which was a video series done with the FAA and several different. Drew Camden was on there, and a couple other drone pilots were on there as well, talking about some of that stuff. And
we'll have to make sure, of course, that if we get on that tasking group, that it is that the focus includes recreational. Because while it's all obvious to us to go, well, of course it will.
Yeah,
we can't make.
I would
can't
love
make that
to
assumption.
go ask every person on the AAC right now, how would you define the drone community and who are they and what do they do? And independently ask them each that question and see how different it is. Or maybe they'll all say, oh, the drone community is, the people flying drones package delivery, or the people flying real estate drones or something. But how many of them are going to say anything about recreation? Some of them would, but not all of them.
Yeah, I think there's a reasonable understanding of what are the various segments, but I think there's certainly we've been saying it for 3 years that recreational outnumbers commercial by an order of magnitude, and we've been saying it and saying it and saying it and saying it, so they've heard it. But I think the view is that what's important is commercial, and then they think of the various segments within the commercial and heavy lifters and a lot of things that require BV loss and a unmanned traffic management system.
Yeah, and it just comes across to me every time I read things like when they say industry, like right there in that second sentence, recommendation is to identify specific drone industry sectors, which I know they also include recreation as an industry, but as a recreational flyer, I don't consider what I do a part of an industry.
Right.
Yep. Yep. And KBS Ken has a good point. I think his FISDO has 4 people on staff, 3 million live in my state. Not sure how the FAA does outreach. And a lot of what the FISDOs, who they work with, are the FAST team, who are all volunteer. So it's a structure that is not set up to handle volume and the volume of UAS pilots. It's organized and staffed to communicate to manned aircraft or manned pilots.
Yeah, so it's definitely an interesting point, and I think let's see, Meat was talking about the amount of damage a regular FPV drone can do in its natural state is pretty limited indeed, and that's something that we have discussed and will continue to discuss, especially in our recommendations for some changes to the current.
And Meat, go look at the TG11 write-up. Tony Nannini is one of the key authors of a work on target level of safety. He's one of the program engineering managers on Google Wing, and he's also on the steering committee of the drone safety team.
Yeah, I mean the 250 gram rule is based on essentially, if I remember correctly, about a 1960s study from NASA on solid metal mass falling from the sky in relation to shuttles and rockets and stuff like that. And the difference between the 1960s and today with the composites and plastics and polymers and stuff that drones are made out of, I mean, there's no comparison. There's a completely different imparting of energy.
Right, and Meat, along those lines, Meat asks, is that the one about the kinetic energy levels? And the answer to that is no, absolutely not. This puts the kinetic energy process back where it belongs, back in the 80s, and it establishes an understanding of the how easily a structure can crush or fracture upon impact, as well as its mass and velocity.
The same kind of things that auto manufacturers do when
Crumple
they're doing
zone.
crash. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So,
right.
But anywho, all right, moving on. Let's see. We've got this loveliness that's going on.
Yeah, so we should just reiterate that that meeting is tomorrow at what is it? Gosh, at 10 o'clock Eastern time.
10 a.m. Eastern.
And it'll be live streamed on their Facebook and YouTube. And we would appreciate everybody watching it live and making comments and letting the FAA know that we're here and we're paying attention and we care, even though the people in the meeting won't be actively watching the comments, but just letting them know we're there. And did we just lose Dave?
We did. We spoke.
Oh well.
Soon.
See you later, Dave.
All right. What was that, Meat?
Said it wouldn't be normal if we didn't.
Yeah.
It is true.
I thought I'd be the one getting dropped out today. My internet's been a little flaky this week, but knock on wood, it's going okay so far.
All right, so DJI drone tracking data has been exposed in the United States. So, long story short, there was a user who was storing aeroscope data on Amazon Web servers or AWS servers, and basically 80,000 drone IDs were exposed in a data leak after it was found. Let's see. We don't know who the owner of the data is, but at this point, we know that the Biden administration has blacklisted DJI, and the U.S. Defense Department and a dozen other companies were added to a list of Chinese entities believed to be connected to the Chinese military, and the Pentagon paved the way for further restrictions on their businesses. And then with recent issues in Ukraine, they've come under a whole lot of flack lately.
Josh,
So,
am I back?
What's that?
I must be back.
You're back.
Yeah, you are. You
Such
are.
a good thing. So, my read on this article is this is an unfortunate situation with AWS, that is Amazon, and this is probably just about not DJI's fault at all.
No,
DJI,
I don't think it is.
This
and a
is an
customer-
individual user, yeah.
A customer of
client.
DJI loaded data up, and you can checkbox your way to backups and security on AWS. And if you want the cheapest, most cheerful cloud storage you can get, it's not that secure.
And it's really
bang.
easy to put it out there in such a way that it's open to anybody.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yep, and it's not DJI doing it at all. But yeah, I came across this story in my normal IT job news stories, and of course it raised some red flags about privacy and security and everything. And the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, as soon as remote ID is there on every drone, this is just not a bug. This is a feature. This is how it's supposed to work.
Well, and here's the fun part: is this comes from Gary Mortimer over at SUS News. He talks exactly about that. So, with the for sale data world that we live in currently, he goes through in this article, and I'll link it here, talking about the ease of selling information from collecting and selling information from remote ID. So, let's see.
Yeah, who's going to be the first person to write an open source app that you can load on any computer that will track all remote ID and just store it into a database for everybody else to see?
Yeah. But
I mean,
Dan,
as
do you
long as
think
you've got
that's
the receivers, right?
practical? Because
So
the-
he actually
you would have
let's check
to-
this out. So he talks about so if you want to start capturing remote ID data for an entire city, so when we start, we chuck low-cost devices within a 400-meter range out in the wild, deploy 10, and realize it's going to take an age. Then we buy better receivers and site them more appropriately and get the reception out to about 750 meters. And finally, roof mount external antenna all the way out to 1.5 kilometers. It might look like this for Cincinnati. It provides a little bit of a map. And they start selling the data to law enforcement officials and Part 107 competitors, so things are on the up and up, and make our ultimate receiver systems and get as far out as 2 kilometers on a good day. And then you capable of covering a city at a lower cost than a single aeroscope. So, and then you can monetize this data essentially.
and
What
like-
is the benefit of this data? I don't understand what this data is giving you.
Well, you can
It's just
sell it to your
anonymous data with a
competitors.
location.
You can
Right,
easily
but it's
figure out. Let's say you're you do railway and well, no, I've heard people talk about this some before, but if you know kind of what your competitors are doing and what flight paths they're taking, you can figure out who they are and which competitor they are, and then you can start following what they're doing and where, and then you can use that information to your advantage.
And stuff.
But you only know that drones are flying there. You don't know what drones are flying
No, but
there
you can
because all the
figure out
serial-
exactly which drone and who's flying it with enough data. Just
I
like
mean, I guess in
when years
theory you
ago
could, but, like-
Netflix posted like anonymized data, and people took that and associated it very quickly with actual people based on
There's a
having
difference
enough
between
data.
aggregating consumer data versus aggregating flight data. I get where you're coming from, but you don't know anything about that drone other than the serial ID of the drone, which can be anonymized every single flight. So, like, I
Right.
get where you're
but
coming from.
For
But
example,
all you know is
where
where it took.
Where I
All
live,
you know is where it showed up. And
if
all you know
I
is where it ended,
see
right?
a drone flying in a certain area, I can tell you 99% certainty which person's flying it. Because I know their patterns and where they fly and when they fly.
But okay, so let's
I just don't see this. I personally don't see this. This doesn't make
But then
sense.
also, like what's mentioned in the chat is if this was just added to an app on a phone, suddenly you've got receivers all over the place collecting this data.
So I mean,
Yeah.
theoretically, you could use it as a competitor, right? You'd be able to go out and potentially, let's say, maybe undercut some of your competition. The second thing is I mean, if you're somebody who is, and this is something we've talked about before, who's looking for a free drone, you could use this data that way. If you're a law enforcement officer, you could use this to essentially set assuming they're focused on this in any way, shape, or form, a air version of a kind of a traffic stop, right? So you can set up in a area that's more akin to people flying drones, and you could sit there and wait to issue tickets, kind of thing. So it's data that's usable. What the validity of it, I agree, is probably a stretch, but again, I mean, any kind of data nowadays is a moneymaker, right? So that's why apps like Facebook and Twitter are free, because they're using your data to basically identify your habits. So
Yeah, I get what you're saying, but I definitely think there's a difference between a browsing habit, like we're equating a
you're not
browsing or
wrong. Yeah.
purchasing habit to a flight habit that you get no other info about. Literally, you only have takeoff and landing location if they're in your range, and you're making assumptions about them, and you have where they flight on the flight path. Like, I mean, this is literally only value. Like if I'm browsing on the internet, you have everything I've clicked on where I've browsed. You have all my cookies. You have all my accounts I've logged in. You have all my catches of Facebook, Twitter. Like that's how you get all that info. Like I
Right.
totally get what you're saying, but there's such a limited data set here. I'm not sure. Like we're gonna get like information about consumer habits from this,
Well,
right? Well, like I think, right?
people get really creative, and like stores are tracking your cell phone as you walk through a mall or by storefronts, and they're using that information and selling it. This is very similar to that.
So
And there'll just be
Blunty,
really odd things that we can't possibly think of right now that'll be used.
so I come up with Blunty as usual. Great question. I come up with 3 answers to your question. The first would be delivery routes, which is what Dan was talking about. So if delivery routes are linear algebra, complicated problems, and if you can see what's going on in your neighborhood, or in that last mile, that's useful. The other is what I'd call an ambulance chaser. So we'd have attorneys capturing this data and using it to demonstrate past nefarious use. That would be bad. And the third could be inspection or ag and ag spraying uses. So you're surveilling the competition. So, but it's does that warrant the infrastructure cost? I think that's a great question.
So
Yeah.
XJet asks, I don't have a copy of the ASTM standards, so can someone tell me whether the serial number of the drone or the operator's registration is included in the RID data stream? So it is down to the serial number of the broadcast
RID
module
device, right?
or a session ID,
right,
which
it's
is
up to
a
how they
randomized.
implement it.
Right. So
Yeah, and the session ID can
and
be
the-
generated at each flight and is
Yeah.
not
Right,
linked.
and the FAA is the only one that has that cross lookup table in the database that can match the registrant to the RID serial. That's not in the data elements in the RID message.
But something like a
So-
remote ID module will have to send the remote ID module's ID. They can't use a session ID because there's no
Right,
way to
exactly.
store that and send it to the FAA.
Yep.
Right, it'd be a serial number.
So then it would be the
and
same
you
thing
would-
every time.
Yeah,
Yep.
and you would store your serial.
I don't
you would-
understand. Wait.
Okay,
Wait.
go
That
back,
is
go
not
back.
how the law is, right? No. Because if
Rule-
you
rule.
don't have That's not how the rule is, right? You're broadcasting a session ID, and that represents you to the FAA. You don't also need a module ID.
You have the choice of either a session ID or a serial number of your
Right.
module.
Yeah, I
And
just want to be clear on that. You do not have to broadcast the same number every time you fly. If it's set up correctly, you can broadcast a session ID that is different each time. There's no way to tell you are the same pilot.
I don't see
Right.
how you
Dan's-
can do that with a module, though.
Right. That's what Dan's point was. So it's so we agree
The
completely.
module generates a
but
new session
add-
each time, right?
But
It's
how
got
do
a
you
key
send
on
that
it,
to the
cryptographic
FAA?
key because a public-private key, the same way you do with anything, right?
We're not seeing. What we're seeing is serial number being broadcast from the practical implementations. So
Okay, so
Good
that should be a
point.
concern that we talk about. Like that should be something that should be brought up and not allowed, right? We should find a way to broadcast session ID, like because they're gonna you're trackable then. This goes against like half the thing we argued against, like
So
or
the
like
serial
I
number,
argued against.
the only place that the serial number is identified is going to be when you register your broadcast module. So that is
No, he's saying that's broadcast. We're saying that that's
Right.
broadcast, and you cannot broadcast a session ID with a broadcast module. My understanding was you absolutely could broadcast a session ID with a broadcast module, and that was part of the rule.
Think of a session ID as like if you have an internet connected standard remote ID drone that's talking to an online database and generating a session and then telling the FAA, okay, this was the session for this flight. You can't do that
My
with
understanding
a module.
was My understanding was that's not how it works at all, right? You don't need that for a session ID. You can have an internal key that you generate a session ID every time from a base key, like a cryptographic key, right? Like that's how a session ID would work. So you're saying only drones that can connect to the internet actively can generate a session ID.
That's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing. So what we're observing is that broadcast modules are going to broadcast the serial.
But a DJI drone that's out of range of the internet also cannot broadcast a session ID?
I think that's what we would speculate. Don't know that for sure.
Has
That
anybody
seems
tried
wild, insane, crazy?
tried OpenID to see what people are doing so far?
I haven't. No.
I haven't either. I just assumed that this was not dumb implementation, right? Like this seems really dumb. Like everybody knows how to generate a key from a base key. Like that's been done forever. Like there's no reason you could not have code on that broadcast module that knows a base cryptographic key that's shared with the FAA. That key knows how to generate keys, just like an authenticator module, like on Google or anybody has that, right? And then you generate a key, and that key is checked with the FAA based on their knowledge of how to generate a key based on a time code. Like I don't know. Like that's just how.
It does seem like it
I
could
don't
be
know.
possible.
And I'm not aware of any FAA activities that are in receipt, that acknowledge that they will manage the receipt of session IDs. So I think this is a good and very important point, but I think the current, technology right now, the implementation is that we will see serial numbers broadcast.
It does seem like the kind of
So
thing
I
the
guess-
FAA wants for a UTM.
So here's the thing that I would kind of posit to kind of alleviate some of the question on this. I would say if the broadcast module is interfaceable with something like an app on your phone, you could probably generate a session ID. I would say if it's independent of, like if it's just a basic standard, basic remote module.
It can't be independent of a phone, right? Because the phone has to talk to a phone to get the location of takeoff, right? Or
Well,
doesn't
not on the
have to.
broadcast module. You'd have a GPS, right? So you'd have an onboard GPS on your drone. So
okay.
I would say that if it's got app compatibility or app driver, essentially, that you could generate a session ID and you could report that and that kind of thing. I would say if it's independent of, let's say, a basic system, it's gonna report probably gonna report the serial number.
So what we know so
So,
far is you have to go to the FAA, register your remote ID module, and you give it the module's information, serial number.
Right.
That way, if somebody has their phone and they see, oh, there's this drone, here's this serial number I see, they tell that to the FAA. They're like, oh, okay, we know who that is because we have that in our database. That's the only way we currently know of for the FAA to get that information.
Yeah, you could just easily do that with a randomly generated ID as well. It just seems crazy that that's not the case.
So XJet says, how does a session ID identify the operator to the law enforcement operator who's picking up the RID signal? It doesn't. So the law enforcement officer would have to get that information from the FAA to identify that individual person. What it is giving you is takeoff location and flight data, flight path and whatnot. So let's see. RID requires the connection to a phone, correct? No, it does not. So standard remote ID requires essentially is going to be it requires the location of the operator and the location of the drone, as well as flight path, velocity, high altitude, all that kind of stuff. Remote broadcast remote ID broadcast modules require to transmit takeoff location, as well as that aforementioned flight data. So again, your flight path, your location, the drone's location, velocity, altitude, all that kind of stuff. So, as well as session ID and or serial number. So, let's see. And there, yeah, the only way to get the RID signal with an individual is going to be through request to the FAA for that information. And what that looks like when it comes is that does that require a warrant? Is that just a simple request? It depends. I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't think anybody does. But yeah, there's no personal identifying information supposed to be broadcast through remote ID. Your name, your phone number, your address, any of that stuff. So, yeah, no PII.
Just the GPS coordinates of where you're standing that
Yeah,
can identify who you are and where you are.
Right.
Right.
But nothing that says, "Hey, my name is Dan. I live here." Right. So, all right. Good questions. Good conversation. And yeah, I don't know what that request structure is going to look like. I imagine it's going to be a simple request through the LEAP program, which is the Law Enforcement Assistance Program of the FAA. But again, how open is the FAA going to be in driving that or providing that information? I'm not sure. I don't think anybody is.
I would assume this will work at some point. They'll have a system similar to like how a police officer does a lookup on your license plate, right? So they'll have some kind of system database. They log in, they type in information, they have credentials, and then they can get your data from the FAA database, right?
I imagine so. I mean, that's what I foresee for sure.
Like it would be insane for them to have to request each time. So I'm sure there'll be some kind of like system for them to generate that information on the fly, right? Or at least somewhat on the fly.
So definitely interesting. All right, so moving along. These good conversations, definitely something that we need to dive a little deeper.
Yeah, while you're loading that next page, maybe we should all take a visit to our local police station if we've got a friend there and say, "Hey, can you figure out if I'm flying this drone and look up my my drone ID and show me how it's done?"
Right. All right, so a VUC, AUVSI slams U.S. states mulling the creation of drone toll lanes. So AUVSI, the world's largest nonprofit organization dedicated to the advancement of uncrewed systems, autonomy, and robotics, says it's willing to take the fight to state legislative sessions to stop all proposals that infringe on the FAA's authority in the airspace, promote the creation of drone toll lanes, and seek to impose undue taxes on drone operations. I'm going to skip a little bit, focusing primarily on navigation easements or the property right acquired from a landowner for the use of airspace above a specified height. These measures promote the creation of toll lanes in the sky for drones. AUVSI points out that such laws at the state or local government level not only dismantle the federal authority of the airspace, but they also create a dangerous and virtually impossible to navigate patchwork of regulations for drone operators. So this is definitely something that we've talked about in the past. Definitely applaud this effort. There are several state legislative bodies, including those in Texas, Louisiana, West Virginia, and Mississippi, who have introduced bills that seek to restrict and tax drone operations. Anything for an extra buck, right? AUVSI stresses that safe airspace for all can be ensured only through national regulation. The group also points to FAA's Beyond and Integration Partnership Agreement programs that are successfully engaging with state, local, and tribal governments as well as industry players. So again, this is something that we absolutely 100% support. Trying to break up the way drones are regulated and to tax the ability to utilize the public national airspace is ridiculous. And if you do it for, let's say you start doing it for commercial flights, then I mean inherently you're doing it for recreational flights. So it's just definitely an interesting thing. So why isn't the FAA taking that to the courts? So a lot of times this is, I mean, they're a regulatory body. A lot of times this has to be fought by, you know, through the process, through locals taking it up, filing lawsuits against the legislative actions.
Yeah, I assume
that
like
kind
the
of thing.
FAA just doesn't have people to do this, and
Yeah.
they just leave it up to the public to get in trouble and then hire lawyers to fight it and use the FAA as, see, the FAA has the right of way. You know, they're the only ones who can make these rules, so the FAA doesn't have to do any extra work.
Right, and there's a lot of cities and towns and whatnot that have created rules that intrude on the FAA's uh, essentially precedent for you know regulating the national airspace, and it goes through courts, or it goes through you know legislative lobbying to get it turned down. This is something that Vic Moss and the DSPA have worked on in different areas. So definitely interesting
Yeah,
that
I'm pretty sure maybe states haven't done anything, but there are definitely some smaller cities and municipalities and stuff that have
yeah,
had rules that got overturned after somebody filed a lawsuit,
challenge them. Yeah.
challenged
Yep,
it. Yeah.
and at a state level, I'd agree with me. Once it's passed at a state level, then it can go to the courts.
Yeah.
You need something on the books and to
To
argue
challenge.
against.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, all right. Let's skip one just because we're running a little short on time here. So this is pretty cool. So the College of Innovation and Design. I apologize. This is Boise State University, I do believe. Let's see. The College of Innovation and Design is now offering a drone certificate program, drone operations for visualization, research, and resource management. The program offers both an undergraduate 7-credit and a graduate 10-credit certificates. Upon completing the program, students will be licensed drone operators who are fully capable of planning and executing drone-based projects for a variety of purposes. Program gives students the skills to enter the workforce as capable drone practitioners, managers, technicians, and researchers. So this is definitely cool. Boise State University is doing. I know a lot of universities are starting to roll things like this out. For UAS, it's an emerging technology, and obviously an emerging career path that is definitely going to be kind of fed from the recreational community, which is why recreational flight is super important. I'm not sure. It doesn't say if it teaches them to fly FPV, but I would imagine it does go through a couple different scenarios. But FPV, maybe not. But all right. I think that's. I think I'm gonna leave it at that. I'll save some of these articles for next time. And
We have a multi GP announcement
oh yeah,
with
go ahead.
Alex.
Go ahead.
So you'll notice that Alex is not with us this evening because he's in Florida at Champs, the multi GP races, and he's placed 6th in sport class. So congratulations to Alex. Great job.
That's awesome.
Nice.
Let's see. What's this? B Roper, new drone certificates.
Yeah, I think Meat was saying that based on that page, he doesn't think people are flying FPV at that Boise State
Oh yeah,
certificate.
gotcha. Yeah, probably a lot of autonomous kind of stuff.
And
or-
unless you consider flying from a cell phone through the camera on a Mavic to be FPV. And kind of it is, but not really.
All right, so Dave, what else you got for us this evening? Wrap us up here.
Just wondering if anyone's flying an ArduPilot. I'm digging into that, and it's we're working on a project with flight test. And anyone into autonomous aircraft, this is pretty cool. I've run into some fellow retired IBMers in Australia, leading some of the development effort of ArduPlane. So it's this is really geeky stuff. It's about an order of magnitude more complicated than setting up on Betaflight.
So if we thought Beta
but
Flight
it's-
has a lot of bells, whistles, checkboxes, and options, ArduPilot is.
Oh baby, oh baby.
So
But
actually, it says ArduPilot needs more parameters.
yes, it does. A couple more.
I think
But
there are
it's,
about 2,000 parameters.
You wouldn't
already.
even
Yeah,
notice a
well-
few more.
That's right. Well worth it, and it looks. And as they say, they're controlling everything from satellites to submarines and everything in between. So great bunch of people, a large number of developers, 20 full times and 50 part-time developers. So that's the largest group of software developers that I'm aware of around a flight controller platform. So cool product, and we'll keep you posted on this project as we move it along. What else is up is we're working on the drone safety team, wrapping up that piece of work on an ad hoc committee on UAS ASRS, the Aviation Safety Report. ASRS. The
Aviation
S is the
Safety
last S.
Reporting System.
System. Thank you. Bless you. Thank you. Thank you. So that's we're going to wrap that up this month, and hopefully we, as I said, will be accepted into the two tasking groups that the AAAC is going to issue tomorrow. One around BV loss, very important to us, and the other equally as important to us.
And it
that's
seems
what,
like the ASRS is a topic of conversation tomorrow as well at the AAAC. So
yes, saw that. It's on the agenda.
But,
Yep.
all right,
And so
Blunty, you got
that's what
anything?
I had.
Oh, I don't think so. I was looking to make sure, but I do not.
Okay, Dan.
No, I think we covered the things I was most concerned about and wanted to make sure we covered, which was the FAA meeting tomorrow. And then the only piece of news that I had run across was that one about the aeroscope data being open to the public. But
Yeah,
we've got
for
those
sure.
covered, so I think I'm
I
all
don't know if
good.
we actually mentioned it, but the remote ID thing has the date they pushed the compliance back to. It's December something.
It's right
December.
before Christmas, right?
Yeah.
22 December. And so if you're working hard on it, then they're going to exercise judgment on enforcing. So don't they always exercise judgment? So that announcement to push that date was one of the more quizzical in my view.
Well,
Yeah,
we already know the FAA likes that Christmas timeline, to
The wording in the slide was very wishy-washy as well. Didn't really commit
Yeah.
to anything.
Absolutely. Yes. Gave them latitude as wide as a truck.
Let's see.
It's on page 33, I
there's-
think.
This was part of that leak thing, right? Let's see. Real world breach, drone delivered exploit system.
So this is something I think we didn't get to talk
Is
about
this
last.
the
It came out.
Wi-Fi spy thing?
Yeah. So basically,
this was one of the articles I had. Let me pull it up real quick. Go ahead,
Okay.
Blunty.
it's just like the first documented attack we've seen, like a physical, basically, what would normally take physical penetration of a network, right? You would normally have to have someone physically present to do this attack. And this was the first attack we've seen that's really totally coordinated. They used 2 separate drones to spoof a network page, basically, for an investment firm, and then use that spoofed page from the drones to collect data. And they were able to identify that there was a spoofed page, and then used like a Wi-Fi detector to locate the drones, like with the signal. And they found that there were 2 drones sitting on top of a rooftop next to an air vent. Yeah, it's just basically the first time this has been documented. Something like this has happened, and I assume we'll see a lot more of this kind of stuff. But it is something that a lot of businesses need to start to consider. Is like,
Yeah.
hey, people don't need to be physically there to do this. Like, cameras all around the building aren't going to help this. Like, a drone can fly 400 feet in the air, land on your rooftop, and then penetrate your Wi-Fi network and hack your building. And there's, you
Well,
have to be prepared for that.
And like XJet says, you could take a slingshot and shoot a Raspberry Pi up there and do the same thing. It doesn't have to be a drone.
I mean,
And it used to be
you'd have to hope it survives, but yeah.
it used to just be
Yeah.
people in parking lots with high gain antennas pointed at a building would do the same thing.
The difference is if you do a month of successful attacks and then you fly the drone back off, nobody will ever know, right? That's the difference here, right? That's the way I think about this. Is like, if you had a way to, like, like maybe a little solar cell in there that just like charge the battery enough to fly away or something. Like, there
Yeah.
are ways you could do these attacks where you could get away and nobody would ever know you're there. If they didn't catch the spoof page and you got away 30 days later, suddenly that investment firm finds out 45 days later that all the customer accounts got accessed and nobody knows how. And they're like scrambling to try to figure that out. So I don't know. I bet we'll see this stuff a lot more, and I'm sure this has happened a lot where people don't know. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
sure.
cybersecurity is a top of the list with many top of the list items with the FDIC, and I anticipate that because they went after a financial institution, that we in the banking community will hear more of things like this. We do a lot of penetration testing now, and I think Dan's right. Is it will expand from picking up Wi-Fi signals to, okay, now let's think about that. We can't find the individual because there is no individual. There's a device that's gotten close enough to pick up the Wi-Fi signals. So I think you're right. I think this is an area of concern, and I frankly am happy that they went after a financial institution, because that will get a number of regulatory and and money behind it. I mean, I'd bet a fair amount that B of A and any of the mega banks are looking at this and saying, "Yep, we need to work on this right now."
Yeah.
Definitely interesting.
Reading more.
Going way
needing
back
more
to
accounts.
to one of
let's,
XJet's comments about the DJI aeroscope breach. Is there any way we can spin this as a positive and say, look, there were 90 million flights, and what was the bad things that happened in those 90 million flights?
Right.
Yeah.
Or just like when we're out there saying there's this many recreation people, there's these many flights. Like, look, there's a database that tells us over this time period there was 90 million DJI related flights that Aeroscope picked up, and that's just a portion of the total flights in the country or the world or whatever that was for.
Right. Yeah. 2019 in the United States, we had 10.3 million flight hours of UAS. Yeah.
All right. So a couple things we're working on real quick just to wrap this up. So obviously we will have some discussion of the aftermath of the AAC meeting. AAAC meeting. Every time Mars Attacks comes to mind. And then we are also moving forward with some recommendations for the FAA Reauthorization Act. We're currently working on those. We will be asking for some feedback on that as soon as we 100% nail that down, and then we'll move forward from there. Still waiting for. Go ahead.
We should also mention that we have a meet and greet. Josh Bixler and I get to say hello and introduce ourselves to Abby Smith, the new Deputy Director of the FAA UAS Integration Office.
Yep.
She is also the co-chair of the drone safety team, which I'm a member, or we are a member in FPVFC.
Yep. So anyway, with that, I will give you the rest of your evening back. Thank you for joining us. We do appreciate it. Thank you for the excellent interaction and feedback, and love answering your questions, love thought-provoking comments, and please continue that in the future, and we'll see you in a couple weeks, okay?
See you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
Bye.